this session, and I have a few words to say on energy and what we experienced in Pakistan a few months ago. And the nature of that flood needs to be reconsidered and rethought. But I'll begin by one of my favorite quotes from E.M. Forster, which I've inflicted on many audiences, I must say, who says that only connect the prose and the passion, and both will be exalted. Only connect. So we have to, in Pakistan, and I was very impressed by these precise and concise recommendations from the sessions that you have held here at IRS. And all the recommendations that you and I have just seen and read are unexceptionable. They are eminent good sense. They are logical. But what they do not say, and I want to put this out in the open, is the profound crisis of the capacity of the Pakistani state to deal with the 21st century. And this crisis is not just limited to climate change. It's there in how we manage our districts at the local level. It's there in how I'm endeavoring to manage the Ministry of Energy, or how we conduct our foreign relations. So this, one of the recommendations, of course, was to have a tech-enabled Pakistan. Yes, indeed. But a profound rethinking is needed now that we have crossed 75 years of age, is how are we going to manage this country of 220 million Pakistanis? We have this residual colonial system that we carry on. I'm still amazed that I get paper files, dozens of them every day, on subjects important and not so important and trivial, on which I have to spend my time. So the first, of course, observation, which is not in my speech that was given to me by the Ministry of Energy, is, of course, we have to think about, we as elected representatives have to think about, is how do we manage the country going forward at every level of governance. There was this recommendation here for strong local government. We've never had it. Let's have it. But of course, the scope of experimentation in society is real but limited. You cannot have too many experiments. And we've had too many experiments. So we just have to look at it with fresh eyes. And my hope and expectation is that a new generation of Pakistani men and women will see this society with fresh eyes and guide us. That this model of governance is closer to the genius of our people. Because now we have a very good idea of what not to do. So this is a general level observation before I talk a little bit about climate change and energy. So the first order of business should be a serious rethink on improving the capacity of the state to deliver the recommendations that were just presented to us. The thing to note about the flood of 2022, ladies and gentlemen, that this was a unique event, not in size, but in nature. This was not a riverine flood. This time the flood came from the sky. And now it's very clear that it was due to climate change. And what climate change did in 2022? Climate change has been doing this for many years, which is to increase the intensity of events, climate events. So rain is more intense, heat is more intense, cold is more intense, but for a shorter period. So patterns are changing. But in 2022, the challenge is that in certain areas, particularly in the middle of the country, so North Sindh, Eastern Balochistan, South Punjab, the rainfall was anywhere from 500 to 700% higher than average. So those areas which usually are water scarce, and their natural development has been to conserve water. So these are areas who want to keep water in if they have some. And suddenly this massive rain falls from the sky. So the same natural structures or barriers that people had put around their agricultural lands to conserve water became a pond of water. And in many areas, we are unable to still drain it out, because draining it out is not a natural process. These are areas which are far away from the river and don't naturally drain into it. So it's, again, it's a tremendous challenge. I was involved in it, first in order to ensure that electricity supplies were restored quickly in these flooded areas. And by grace of Almighty, we were able to achieve that. Very rapid restoration of electricity in these areas. But again, I'll just share an anecdote with you and you can draw your own conclusions. That there was this review meeting of flood relief, and Chief Minister Singh says that in certain areas, although there is electricity, but we need proper electricity, full voltage electricity, in order to run our pumps. So I had to go, I visited that section of Sindh to restore that grid. So the pumps, very large size pumps, dozens of them in like 10 kilometers apart, that were used to actually pump water from underground to provide agriculture. We use them to drain water out. On all kinds of issues or other, there are distributional issues of, from whose land the water will cross. But 2022 was a unique event in Pakistan's history in which usually what happens was river is here, it floods, and then when the water in the river recedes, the same water comes back naturally and it's drained out. Here we are having to drain it out through electricity, through pumps, which is extremely expensive and requires tremendous resources, not only in terms of finances, but also, of course, technical resources and the availability of electricity. So this is a difficult challenge. And I am not sure we are prepared for it if it happens again in 2023. So it's a new endeavor that has opened up and a challenge that we have to cross. The larger point is that we have to be prepared for many such events, because the corollary of this, flood in northern Sindh, East Balochistan, South Punjab is that in these areas where there is less rain, there was a massive rain. But what went unremarked, and something for this very distinguished audience to consider. We have not noticed it, that the usual areas of rain did not receive enough rain. So the areas which feed our rivers, particularly Chenab and Jhelum, there was not enough rain this year. And that presents not only an agricultural challenge, that presents some kind of strategic challenge also. If rainfall patterns, one can only hope and pray that they don't change, but if this is a harbinger of change in rainfall patterns, we are looking at some serious changes and serious rethinking there also, in terms of the Indus Waters Treaty, in terms of how we deal with India, in terms of whether we have enough water in Chenab, because I cross it, Chenab and Jhelum, I cross on my way to Gujranwala to Islamabad twice a week. So this is the kind of challenge that we face, and which comes back to the capacity of the state to manage these things. We have to gear up for it. That if we continue to receive rain in areas which have very rarely received high rains, and then what do we do when there are dry periods in areas where we're supposed to have lots of rain? So that's another challenge that's facing us. But coming to energy, with which I'm grappling with every day. And again, I'm reminded of lines by the poet Browning, who said, that a man's reach should exceed his grasp. What is a heaven for? So I'm trying to grasp something at the Ministry of Energy, where my grasp is overwhelmingly exceeded by the challenges. Very briefly, we have had in our 75-year history 4 ages of energy. The first age, you can say, was the hydel age in 60s and 70s, in which we built these 2 large dams, Mangala and Tarbela, which provided our electricity resources. And that age lasted until the end of the 80s and early 90s. And then we found out that the hydel generation was insufficient to our needs. So we moved to a next phase in the 94 IPP policy. Because of low oil prices, we moved into oil-based energy. And lo and behold, it took another decade and a half, we found out even that was insufficient and had become too expensive. So at the beginning of 2013, if you recall, probably some of the worst electricity blackouts in our history. So that ushered in the third era, which is simultaneously was of coal and liquefied natural gas. Because these 2 fuels were the cheapest at that time, at that period. So we invested in coal, we invested in liquefied natural gas, and we were able to largely control the electricity shortage in the country by 2018. But then, of course, 2022 hit us. Russia's attack on Ukraine hit us. And what that did was that not only oil prices had risen, but as a consequence of that event in February 2022, coal prices went up 400%. And natural gas, which also went up nearly 5 times, but was not to be had. It wasn't available in the country because once Russia stopped Europe's gas, Europe sucked in all the world's supplies. And so even if we had the money, we couldn't buy gas. So that third age of liquefied natural gas and coal, imported coal, I might add, ended in 2022. And now we are faced with this new challenge of what to do, in which, of course, new hydel, which was already begun back in 16, 17, it won't come into operation earliest before 2027. The Amir Basha and Dasu dams, some other hydel projects also. It is frankly very expensive to run imported coal and LNG plants. So what is our conclusion? So the conclusion of Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif's government is that henceforth, all new electricity generation installed in this country, inshallah, will be based on domestic sources. We shall not import fuel for our future energy needs. What does that translate into? That translates into 5 sources of energy that we are now going forward. First, of course, as I said, there is hydel projects are in the pipeline. They are being constructed, will be done. But second is, of course, solar, which we are now going forward in a big way. Solar, very soon we will have our first bidding on a 600 megawatt solar, which of course we will then scale up to 6,000 megawatts in the next year or so. The important point to note is that in the beginning, and I keep telling this to Honorable Prime Minister, that the first phase of this solar installation is to reduce the price of electricity. So we essentially replace during daytime our expensive fossil fuel burning plants with solar in order to bring down the average price of electricity. Then a part of the solar project, of course, is the solarization of all federal government-owned buildings. I hope, Ambassador Saab, IRS soon will also be solar, inshallah, and run on solar during daytime. And the third part is an innovation of inviting private sector to install microgrids, 1 to 4 megawatts, on rural feeders. So they begin to not only improve electricity availability in rural areas, but the distribution companies will have ready access to some measure of solar energy, local access. So this is the second part of our energy fuel program. The third, of course, is wind. We are blessed with a very productive corridor in Jhampir, Sindh. Some projects already installed there. We are going to increase their size. There's also an unexplored, unused, it is explored, wind corridor in Balochistan, which will, inshallah, will begin to be used very soon. So wind is another source of energy. Then there are 2 sources that need some attention. First is nuclear. Is that the projects that we began in 2014-15, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif laid the foundation stones, K2 and K3. Both are now operational and running beautifully. And it's something that we have to think about when we think of future planning for energy needs. And under the great cauldron of pressure of energy in 2022, 2 things came out from international community that you need to be aware of. That certainly the European countries who used to lecture many of us on use of coal rediscovered coal and went back to using coal. So coal is now kosher. But we will, inshallah, fulfill our commitments under SDGs not to use imported coal, and that's where I seek your attention is, but we will go massively into domestic coal, which we have in Allah Almighty is very kind, tremendous abundance in Thar. So very soon, some projects that were delayed in the last 4 years are coming online. The Shanghai Thercoal, 1320 megawatts, will be inaugurated sometime in the next 2 months. Another 330 megawatts is already ready for inauguration. So by 30th of June, we expect that we will have nearly 2,700 megawatts from domestic coal. And for this audience, the international sanctions are on imported coal, not on domestic coal. So we intend to, and we hope that the government, the people of Pakistan will elect later this year, will continue this massive drive into using domestic coal to fulfill our energy needs. That doesn't require any importation. It's right there and ready to be exploited. And in fact, if some of you have the opportunity, please go to Thar. It's an inspiring site to visit, both Block 1 and Block 2. And we have 13 blocks, so there's much more to go. So 5 energy sources, let me recap: hydel, solar, wind, Thercoal, and nuclear. So this is the way forward as we look to take Pakistan into the 21st century with abundant and we hope cheap electricity to energize our coming economic growth, inshallah. Part of it that we have recently done was, again, something that was tried in part earlier, but has been now put into a comprehensive package, is energy conservation. It's something that we have to learn. We don't really understand it, don't want to do it, find it inconvenient, but it's something that we have to learn to do because energy is likely to remain expensive for the foreseeable future. So we have to learn conservation. So only one part of it attracted public attention, which was that, we said shops will close somewhat little earlier, not too early. And I had to argue again and again and again that in most civilized countries that we given examples of, shops are long closed by 8 p.m. So it's not an anomaly that we are asking the people of Pakistan to do, but it's good policy. It saves us energy. I'm asked the question of, you have sufficient electricity, why do you want to save it? So another profound observation that I hope you will take away with you is that we have a lot of expensive electricity, but not enough economical electricity. So if we burn furnace oil, yes, we have sufficient electricity, but that is just too expensive, as all of us experienced last summer, in which particularly the June usage before. And again, maybe I'm going on for too long, but again, something that I have to, Ahmed Faraz said, देखो ये मेरे ख्वाब हैं, देखो ये मेरे ज़ख्म हैं, मैंने अपना हिसाब जहाँ सरेआम रख दिया. So this issue of tremendous, and something that we have to manage. Many countries do so, but few have this intensity, that Pakistan's cooling load is 18,000 megawatts. And our normal usage these days, for example, in which all the industries are running, the shops are open, all the economy is as much open as possible, that's 12,000 megawatts. So our base requirement that we experience in winter is 12,000 megawatts. And in summer, it is 30,000 megawatts. So this 18,000 of cooling load is one that we are trying to manage. So when people ask me, why is there load shedding in winter, I tell them, because I don't want to increase your bills. I don't want to run a single megawatt of expensive electricity. So that's how we are managing this process. And part of it is energy conservation. And it's not just closing shops early. We are trying different ways of conserving energy. Some will require behavioral change, some wouldn't. But simple things that we have to teach our children to be able to conserve electricity. Simple things like alternate street lighting, shut down every second street light and conserve some electricity there. But also to ensure that in ways of managing, we are able to bring economies so that it's not enough to have electricity, you have to have electricity that is economically viable. So that's the challenge that we face. There was some mention of transmission issues and theft issues in distribution companies. So one of our measures, many measures, but one I want you to take away with you is this introduction of, on a large scale, advanced metering infrastructure. We expect that introduction of this technology in which the meter reports in real time, not only to the consumer, but also to distribution companies. You can have very soon, in the next year or so, you could have on your mobile phone your electricity usage as it happens anywhere in the world. You can just have it. And of course, the distribution company. So that's one of the measures that we are rolling out, not only to increase the recovery and reduce theft, but also to increase the quality of billing. I was quite amused. We have, of course, a federal ombudsman. So we recently checked of what kind of complaints that they get against power division and electricity. And nearly 91% of complaints are against incorrect bills. So people are not complaining of expensive electricity, they are complaining of their incorrect bills, unfair bills that they. So this advanced metering infrastructure will, I hope, alleviate that problem also. So now that मैंने अपना हिसाब जान आपके सामने रख दिया है, so I'll just conclude by saying that these very eminently sensible suggestions that were put forth here, in order to be able to implement them, we need, if not a new structure, but a thoroughly re-engineered structure of governance, in which we have to overcome what Riaz Muhammad Khan wrote as a subtitle of his book, Our Resistance to Modernity. Having a mobile phone in your pocket doesn't mean that you are modern. There has to be a openness in our minds, in our economy, in our culture and society, openness to other societies and other cultures and other ways of thinking, because that is the only way countries make progress. We also have to be open to investment from abroad, or on which we put too many restrictions, we have too many reservations. If you look at the economic history of the past 30 years, you will find that those countries have prospered that invited and managed and augmented investment from abroad. So it's China since 1980, India, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, and of course, two final thoughts here. First, of course, it seems to me in Pakistan, 75 years of our existence, we have suffered a version of what was observed in oil-producing countries as a resource curse. That many of these countries were blessed with this tremendous and expensive resource like oil or gas have been unable to develop fully, technically, industrially, because somehow the availability of that cheap resource of revenue, for them it was cheap, restricted their overall development. Perhaps only Norway is a country that has escaped the resource curse. And it's because they started putting a part of their revenues into a fund that they use for then overall other purposes to improve their competitiveness. We have suffered a version of that resource curse. And what has been our resource that we have perhaps abused is our geostrategic location. And that the overuse of that God-given resource has stunted our economic development, our political development, our ways of thinking about the world. So that's why I use the Foster quote, and I bring it back here. It says, only connect. You have to connect to the world. You have to connect to your neighbors for trading. You have to connect to the world for knowledge and new ways of thinking. So that resource curse, or in a way you could say addiction that we have suffered for 75 years, these days, post-Western withdrawal from Afghanistan, we are suffering our own kind of withdrawal that addicts suffer, that our ready recourse to that drug of bailouts is no longer available. And please note this, now that you are forced to rely upon your own resources, you find that $80 billion import is not feasible. It's just not feasible. So we are going through these difficult economic environment which are actually growing pains. As someone said, a ship is safest in harbor, but that's not what a ship is for. So we have been safe in this harbor for too long due to economic bailouts that we have received in our 75 years. And suddenly now we are having to sail the choppy seas of international economy, the new storms, geopolitical storms that are raging, and we find ourselves not very well prepared. So in this difficult environment, of course, we have to sail this ship, and I hope that under guidance of the wise people and of IRSA, gathered by Ambassador Riaz, Nadeem Riaz, and of course the participants, you will be able to tell us a part of the way of how to ship the sail of the Pakistani state going forward. Final anecdote is from China. But back in late 70s, Deng Xiaoping went to his central committee and said, we have to open up, as I am arguing today with you, that we have to connect, we have to open up. The phrase that he used came from the Book of Han, probably many tens of centuries ago in China. The phrase he used was, we shall learn truth from facts. And when he was asked to explain this, he said, we have this version of truth in the Red Book, these tenets of communism and socialism. But the fact is that China is poor and hungry. So what does one do? We shall learn truths from facts. So my hope from IRSA is that it will help us sift facts and guide us towards the truth. Pakistan Zindabad.